U.S. President Donald Trump has hinted that a decision on Iran could be made imminently following what both sides described as positive and constructive nuclear talks in Oman over the weekend. Speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One on April 13th, Trump confirmed that he had consulted with advisors on the matter.
Well, we're going to be doing it very shortly. Iran also, it was another way. I met with a different group of people in Iran, and we'll be making a decision on Iran very quickly.
Negotiations held in Oman on April 13th marked the first formal engagement between Tehran and the Trump administration, spanning both his current tenure and his earlier term in office. Officials familiar with the discussions said they were conducted in a productive, calm, and positive atmosphere. While Trump remained guarded in his remarks, he suggested cautious optimism. Trump has previously warned that military action remains on the table should diplomacy fail to produce a deal curbing Iran's nuclear ambitions. Axios, citing two sources familiar with the negotiations, reported that a second round of U.S.-Iran nuclear talks is scheduled to take place in Italy's Rome on April 19th. The Trump administration reportedly expressed satisfaction with the initial round of discussions held in Oman on April 12th, according to U.S. officials. The primary goal, transitioning from indirect back-channel talks to direct face-to-face negotiations, was achieved. That shift is expected to continue in Rome, a venue proposed by the American side. Behind the scenes, the two lead negotiators, U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, according to Axios, held a closed-door meeting lasting around 45 minutes, significantly longer than initially disclosed. Axios, while citing a source familiar with the talks, reported that the exchange was substantive, serious, and excellent, marking the most senior-level dialogue between the two nations in nearly a decade. However, the talks began under a cloud of mutual suspicion. Iranian negotiators reportedly raised concerns over the United States' decision to unilaterally exit the 2015 nuclear accord under Trump's previous administration. They questioned whether Washington might again abandon any future agreement. A source with knowledge of the engagement said Witkoff briefed President Trump on April 13th following his return from Oman in a separate development. Witkoff also met with Israeli Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer to share details of the talks. Israel, which remains deeply skeptical of any diplomatic breakthrough with Tehran, has urged Washington to keep a military option on the table should negotiations collapse. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reiterated on April 13th that while Washington remains committed to a diplomatic path to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, the American military is fully prepared to act decisively if negotiations fail. Speaking on CBS Face the Nation, Hegseth described initial indirect talks between U.S. and Iranian diplomats in Oman as productive and a good step. However, he made it clear that diplomacy has its limits. We've shown a capability to go far deep and big again. We don't want to do that. But if we have to, we will to prevent the nuclear bomb in Iran's hands. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal reported on April 13th that the Director General of the UN nuclear watchdog, Rafael Grossi, will visit Tehran this week ahead of the next round of talks between Iran and the United States. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and the commander-in-chief of Iran's armed forces met senior military officials in Tehran on April 13th as part of his annual engagement to mark the new Iranian calendar year. In his address, the leader of the Islamic Revolution called on the military to bolster its readiness, both in terms of hardware and what he described as software preparedness. Khamenei underscored the importance of strengthening the armed forces' equipment structure and organizational capabilities, while also placing emphasis on the ideological commitment of troops. Faith in their goals and mission and certainty in the justness of their path must match the development of arms. Khamenei pointed to Iran's independence and Islamic identity as key drivers of hostility from foreign powers. It is not the name of the Islamic Republic that angers the enemy. It is the will of a country to be Muslim, independent, and dignified without relying on others. Criticizing what he called the double standards of global oppressors, Khamenei said powerful nations permit themselves the most lethal weapons while condemning defensive progress in others. Certainty, faith, determination, courage, and trust in God must exist to the fullest extent in the armed forces. For throughout history, ostentatious armies lacking these qualities have been defeated. Earlier in the session, Major General Mohammad Bagheri, Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, recapped Iran's defense posture over the past year. But Gary detailed a series of initiatives from advanced weapons production and high-intensity drills to integrated military diplomatic actions that he confirmed the armed forces' full alignment with Iran's New Year slogan, set by Ayatollah Khamenei during Nowruz, and expressed appreciation for President Masoud Pezeshkian's support with the support of the people. The armed forces are fully prepared and will ensure that they will leave Iran's enemies yearning in vain for their nefarious goals. Trump, during his first term, pulled the U.S. out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, an agreement to limit Iran's nuclear program, in exchange for sanctions relief, triggering a downward spiral of sanctions, mistrust, and nuclear escalation. Now, with tensions simmering once again, Washington has even floated the threat of military action if diplomacy fails. But why all the fuss over Iran's nuclear program? Officially, Iran says it only wants nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. Think power generation and medicine. However, the reported discovery of secret facilities back in 2002 and repeated breaches of international agreements have raised red flags globally. Nuclear weapons require uranium, which has been enriched to 90% purity. Under the JCPOA, Iran was only allowed to possess up to 300 kilograms of uranium, enriched to 3.67%, sufficient for civilian nuclear power and research purposes, but not nuclear bombs. But by March 2025, the International Atomic Energy Agency said Iran had about 275 kilograms of uranium, which it had enriched to 60% purity. That is enough to theoretically make about half a dozen weapons, while U.S. officials say it could take over a year for Iran to build an actual weapon. Others warn it might only take months. The stakes are high, and this latest round of diplomacy might be the last shot before things take a darker turn.